I'm going to start with a little clip here. If we could bring it up. Remember, volume up to the that. You need the volume a little higher.
It is not an empirical matter. It is a matter of faith.
They insisted upon waiting here until they see Kalis again. Their faith appears to be unaffected by his inability to defeat Galba. They still believe. I once had what could be considered a crisis of the spirit.
You?
Yes. The Starfleet officers who first activated me on Omicron Theta told me I was an android, nothing more than a sophisticated machine with human form. However, I realized that if I was simply a machine, I could never be anything else. I could never grow beyond my programming. I found that difficult to accept. So I chose to believe that I was a person, that I had the potential to be more than a collection of circuits and sub-processors. It is a belief which I still hold.
How did you come to your decision?
I mean, a leap of faith.
Anyone know what that is? See if you smile. It's like, I know what I want to do. Okay, I know. Yeah. You know, I'm a big Star Trek fan, and actually, I think there are a lot of things that for us as people of faith can help us journey to think about a future that is a better place. And I think that's the thing that Jesus promises. And this is a very interesting scene. It's from one of the Next Generation episodes where Worf, the Klingons, having this struggle of faith. And Data, who, you notice his skin is very pale, he's an android, he's a machine. And what does he say about that when he on this planet was awakened, was activated, and he had to make a decision? What was his decision that he had to choose between? And say, oh, good. So somebody's fixing my battery here. Yeah, is he just going to be a machine, or would he see himself as a human being, as a person? And what did he base his decision on? Yeah, Now this is interesting because sometimes when we talk about faith, we kind of think like, well, that's something that's completely based on nothing. It's just, it's out of nowhere. And I don't think that's the case. It's saying there's lots of reasons for that. It's like saying, is there God or isn't there? And you say there's all kinds of reasons to believe that God is there, and there are lots of reasons to believe God is not. But at some point, you make a choice, and you have to just decide. And he's saying, I made a leap of faith, and he decided that I was going to be a person. Thank you. He said, if I didn't, then I could never go beyond what I was. But if I believed that I was a person, I could become something more than what I was. I think it's interesting. Rob Bell in his video Rhythm talks about believing in God, and said our society tends to want to really focus on, is there a God or isn't there? He said, but for most people, not just through the ages, but throughout the world now, that's not the issue. Most people, whether God is there or not, the question is, what is God like? And I think that's also an issue of faith. And I want to lift up a story here. This is from Matthew chapter 11. And it says, when Jesus finished placing this charge before his 12 disciples, he went on to teach and preach in the villages. And John, meanwhile, had been locked up in prison. And when he got wind of what Jesus was doing, he sent his own disciples to ask, he says, are you the one we've been expecting, or are we still waiting? Jesus told them, go back and tell John what's going on. The blind see, the lame walk, lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, the wretched of the earth learn that God is on their side. Is this what you were expecting? To count yourself most blessed? Now, it's kind of interesting to me. Now, John sends his disciples to Jesus to say, are you really the one? And this is partly why this is a very interesting passage to me is when I went to India about, oh my goodness, how long ago was that? 14 years ago. Went with Lutheran World Relief to see the work that they were doing in India. And we went to this hospital complex in a very rural area of India. And people who would never otherwise be able to go were at this hospital. And the beds were covered with quilts made by little old ladies back here in their quilting circles. That was their hospital beds, what they covered the beds. And there was a man there who would take old glasses, pairs of glasses that were sent maybe from here, and grind them down into glasses for people who couldn't see, who were nearsighted. Now, if any of you are nearsighted, especially, if you can't see anything out there. If you didn't have your glasses or your contacts, what would life be like? And that's what it was like for most people there. They also would take, for like $28, could make artificial legs for people who had lost a limb. And there was one lady we met there who hadn't walked in like 20 years. And that day she got her leg and she walked for the first time on her own in 20 years. There was another guy who was demonstrating how well this worked. He had an artificial leg. He was riding a bike. He climbed up a tree. It was just amazing. I mean, he just right up this tree. And they told us about how also they would go in the villages. They would train women, especially all these things. I remember the leader of our group saying, "Do you remember this passage where Jesus says, when they ask, are you the one? He says, what do you see? The lepers are cleansed. The blind see. The lame walk. The dead are raised." He says, "And blessed is anyone who doesn't take offense at me." They say that, if you want to see God at work, you look for these amazing things that God is doing and bringing life where there wasn't life. What's interesting to me is John is the one who's in prison. And he sends his disciples to Jesus to say, "Are you really the one coming from God?" Now, this seems kind of strange. Why would John question this? But if you remember the story, and actually this Sunday is often the Sunday that John is lifted up, the one preparing the way for the one coming. And when John came, what was John saying? Do you remember the things that John would say? He'd say things like, God is coming with judgment. His, the fire is, coming to unquench. He's got his sickle in his hand to cut down the, it's like, does John sound like God is a really happy God? Right? So John comes saying, God is coming in judgment because you're all messed up. And he gets locked up in prison, and he says, this Jesus is the one. And then Jesus comes doing what? Is he coming in judgment? No. He's healing people and casting out demons and raising the dead, and the crippled can walk, and lives are changed. And John's like, well, this isn't what I was expecting. Are you really from God? And and what's interesting to me is that, I think you can find people of faith who look at God in these different ways, and you can find reasons throughout the scriptures, ours and even the other scriptures that say God is wrath and God is coming in judgment. And you can find the scriptures that say God is coming in love, that God is love. And ultimately, how do we choose? It's kind of a leap of faith. We have to say at some point, you know what? This is what I believe God is like, and I'm going to choose to live as if God is that way. I can still remember, I've shared this, I know, with some of you, my bishop when I was first en route to becoming a pastor. And she shared how when she was in college, she experienced that was much like what I had of people telling her, that God is about judgment, and Jesus coming is like God throwing us a life preserver, but we had to grab it. If you don't grab it, you're going to drown. You got to keep your eyes on Jesus. And I remember her saying, she said, that wasn't the God that I met in Jesus. The God I met in Jesus is the God who dives into the water and pulls me from the water when I can't do anything. And I think that really ultimately it comes down to that. What kind of God do we believe God is? Or like in C.S. Lewis's The Chronicles of Narnia, in The Silver Chair, he talks about these two children, a prince and this marshwiggle, which is kind of like a half person, half frog kind of creature, who've gone into the depths of the earth in these caverns to defeat this white witch who's captured the prince. And she tries to put them under an enchantment, and she tries to tell them that there's no world above, there's no sun above, there's no Aslan, this God's presence in the world that comes and is blind, that none of these things exist, and they're all about to fall under the enchantment. And the marshwiggle stomps on the fire, and apparently burnt marshwiggle is not really a very enchanting smell. They kind of come to. He says, what, part of me, Madam? He says, maybe you're right. He says, maybe you're right. Maybe there is no world above. Maybe there's no sun in the sky. Maybe we're just imagining your lantern a little bigger. And maybe there's no Aslan. We're just imagining your cat bigger and better. He says, but it seems to me that the made-up things are more important than the things in your real world here. So he says, I'm going to continue to live as a Narnian even if there's no Narnia. I'm going to continue to follow Aslan even if there isn't Aslan. I mean, ultimately we have to face it and say, no matter what anyone says, no matter what been told, I have to choose, what kind of God is that I see in Jesus? And, what kind of God is going to be, and what will I do with that? The second thing I think is first deciding, if we believe that God is about love and mercy, then what does it mean to trust in this God? And I have a stool up here, I think, there we go. Actually, it's this I share with Carolina here. Now, if you look at this stool, it seems like a pretty solid stool, doesn't it? I don't think I want to hit it on anything, but so I can stand up here, and talk about how this is a great stool, how you can sit on this and it'll hold you up, right? You know, stand firm, you can sit on this for as long as you want and it'll be great, right? But am I trusting in the stool? How would I trust in the stool? I have to sit on it. Now, I could do you remember the middle school getting ready for lunch seat? Can you sit in your chair? You all know that?
Yeah.
Right? Because the bell's going to ring and I'm ready to go. If you pulled this stool up from underneath me right now, what would happen? I'd be fine. I'm standing here right now. I got my toes pulled up. I'm still good. See? Am I trusting in the stool? No. If I'm going to trust in the stool, I have to get all the way on the stool. Put my feet up on here. Now, if the stool were to collapse, what would happen? Yeah, it'd be kind of painful. You know, instead of picturing it like, you know, splinters through me or whatever. But to trust it, I have to sit on it. And there's a risk because the stool could fall. Right? If I believe that God is love and mercy, and I want to trust in it, then I have to take the risk and live as if God is really love and mercy. And I could be wrong. But I'm thinking there's a passage that Jesus brings up, if you click on, in John 66. Jesus is saying some very hard things, and lots of people are leaving. We usually don't bring these passages up. We like the ones where everyone is coming to follow Jesus. But he's bringing up these hard things. And it says, from this time, many of his disciples turned back and no longer followed him. Many of them. And Jesus turns to the 12 and he says, you don't want to leave too, do you? And Simon Peter answers him. He says, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. Because we have come to believe and to know that you are the Holy One of God. So Peter's like sitting on the stool saying, look, you know what? There is no place else to go. You know, we want life that's really life, and you're the only place we found it. And, you know, where the heck else are we going to go? Because if the stool collapses, there's no other stool to sit. So we're going to take the risk and sit in the stool and go wherever it is that you lead us. We're going to trust that you're the one, that you are the one who has these words of life. Now, the thing about this is that there isn't certitude. You know, we like to try and prove it. You know, if we can prove that Noah's Ark happened, or you know, we can prove that the tomb was empty. If we can prove that the world was created 6 days, if we do these things, then we have certitude. We can know. You know, but you can't. Ultimately, you have to make the leap of faith. You say, I need to decide that God really is love and live as if God is.